Ahoy there, Legion! If you've been playing Warframe as much as we have this year, you might have noticed that content drought's been going on strong. 2018, the year of our Lotus, which has been lovingly coined as the year of cosmetics by my boy Mr. Buros. That's about spot on, I says. Now, I'm not here to complain. Today. I basically did that in my entire last video, but this one though. This one's all about being positive and providing helpful suggestions to DE on possible ways to fix the current content drought and how to prevent them from happening again in the future. First off, let's start with the obvious suggestion. Number 1, release more content. In an ideal universe, this would be the only thing on the list, and with a snap of our fingers, the content would double and be perfectly balanced, as all things should be. While it's the most direct suggestion, it's also the most simplistic, and if all my years gaming have taught me anything, it's that simplistic is still way too complex for most developers, so let's break it down in detail for them, just in case. How can they realistically release more content faster? Back in the day, Warframe was a bit similar to, you guessed it, Minecraft. Which is an odd mental image for some, I'm sure, but if fans of both may recall, in the beginning we'd get nice numbered updates with a chunk of changes and new goodies to mess around with. After a while, those would get stale, and usually not too long after, we'd get another update to reset the clock and start the process all over again. Those were some good times, and that's not just my nostalgia glasses speaking. Long story short, they both evolved into doing ultra bite-sized patches or snapshots, and left the real content to have much longer distances between updates than previously. While behind the scenes that might have benefited the company, from the player's perspective this was the opposite of improvement. We want more content, not less. And this isn't even limited to the current landscape feature on Venus. To quote the greatest sage of memes, our problem isn't that there's a content drought because they're working on Fortuna. Our problem is that there's a content drought because they're working on Fortuna and there is nothing to do in the meantime. Excellent point, you beautiful banana bat. How can DE focus on large projects and still find ways to keep players entertained and logging in? Number 2, tactical alerts and weekend events. Another staple old school Warframe utilized was not only releasing content nimbly, but packing sometimes hastily thrown together tactical alerts and weekend events to keep players glued to their keyboards. I mean, Captura with Ivara, Ember, Nova, and Valkyria still managed to do that extremely technically, but we're not talking about solo activities here. These events encouraged everyone to chime in and had some odd modifiers to boot. Only a certain weapon type was allowed, or all the enemies were replaced with manics, or even more frightening, nullifiers. The challenge involved, the limited time to run them, and usually the rare rewards, all factored in to really boost player engagement. While not requiring much effort on DE's part, it made players try extra hard to log in before the event ran its course. These weren't large orchestrated events like Alid vs Anyo, just simple things thrown together with usually pre-existing enemies, objectives, and locations. But how are we going to get these events, you might be wondering. Number 3, dedicated dev squads. Update 16 brought with it the Conclave. And quite surprisingly, a dedicated PvP balanced team. If you scrolled through the patch notes for what seemed like years after that update, you'd see endless tweaks and changes to anything related to PvP. For a game all but focused on PvE, this was an interesting choice. The good news is, if they're willing to let a group dedicate themselves to something only a fraction of the player base even touches, we got pretty decent odds they'd be willing to have the same amount of people work on planning these events that'll keep the vast bulk of their player base entertained during the wake these large content updates tend to create. Now this might show the age of some folk watching, but back in the day it was quite common in MMOs for monthly events to be held by community managers that were entirely run in-game, so no special tools were required. They found ways to make it work, make it fun, and the loot was often procured themselves. There were other more regular events held weekly, like Best Outfit or dueling tournaments, stuff like that. Luckily, we've come a long way since then, but the point being, even without access to tools, creativity can find a way. And no pressure, but if you watched any of the live streams Warframe officially airs on their channel, you'll note each of those lovely ladies all have title of a community coordinator, manager, or community director in live ops. Now, I could be wrong, but that sounds like the perfect group to be running that sort of thing to me. Not to say they'd be the only people running it, but at least they could pick out some ideas from the community they manage and pass that along onto someone who can plug those modifiers in, and there we go. A coordinated event between community and moderators that they can even stream on their respective shows they host. Speaking of dedicated teams, DE can cover a lot more ground and faster if instead of focusing on the single most important issue at the top of the stack, one at a time, maybe some preventative maintenance should be in order, so little issues buried in that pile of suggestions don't progress into big problems that demand their attention in the long run. Number 4. Fixing old and forgotten content. If DE is set on taking a while to make a big set-piece, time-intensive update, it would be beneficial and actually work in tandem with their goals of improved quality if they simply dusted off old content and polished common, long-standing issues the game has had over the years. The scary reality of the situation for the developers is, to drop everything to work on old content isn't going to draw in new players, and risks actively scaring away the current ones who are already dealing with the content drought as it is. On the other side, to solely work on the newest, greatest content is to let infrastructure go unattended, and minor cracks eventually become massive structural weaknesses. Instead of one or the other, or jumping from one extreme to the next, I suggest they continue their full speed ahead on update plans, but allow a small group of dusters to tidy up any long lingering cobwebs. In essence, if it takes a long time to make something brand new on the high concept side of things, why not expend far less energy by tackling tiny tweaks and dusting off what used to be the shiny new theme that was inevitably left on the shelf to make way for the next new shiny theme shortly after. It wouldn't require tons of elbow grease or data sheets. Going back to revive and fix old content is actually a very frequent player request, so in tandem with new content also on the way, it would please everybody. And heck, Pablo is lauded to be the guy who reworks older, underpowered frames. If just one guy can reliably do that, there's gotta be a ton of people on staff just as useful and willing to spruce up the place. And don't forget, Pablo's field of expertise is UI, so there is no limitation or qualification on who can do what. If they're interested, got a knack for it, have time available, let them have a crack at it. So, in theory, you got the main focus of the entire office aiming at the heavy lifting of the new content on the way, a small squad in charge of events and tactical alerts to keep things exciting during that wait, and another tiny troop of dedicated dusters who are in charge of general maintenance of older content and long-forgotten player bug reports. Assuming that's firing at least on half cylinders, that's a pretty nice cluster of efficiency and productivity from my perspective, which leaves the final suggestion, which is as simple as the first on this list, but no less impactful on the morale of the entire player pool of the game. Number 5. Stick to release dates. Once they are announced, DE should always follow through and make good on a release date. I've seen some suggest a solution to avoid missing release dates is just not announce them in the first place, but that is a tragic mistake in my opinion. To quote the classic film Dodgeball, I found that if you have a goal, you may not reach it, but if you don't have one, then you're never disappointed. And I gotta tell you, it feels phenomenal. The joke therein, of course, being the guy saying it is, I won't say lazy, but he's rather relaxed. By avoiding release dates, and this applies to every game company by the way, it might shield you from potential negative comments, but it all but ensures that delays and day one patches will become an integral part of your design process. As any content creator is aware, we have in theory an unlimited time to make something, and if we allow ourselves to keep perfecting each upload, the video will never be released. It's a vicious cycle that we can see whenever a big YouTuber takes an extended vacation. See if this sounds similar to Warframe at all to you. The time between content has grown so large, they feel the need to do something big to make up for it, which then takes far longer to produce than they're used to. Naturally, they find more things that need perfecting inside, which adds even more wait time on top of that, so they find even more new things to add to counteract that delay, and thus the vicious cycle continues, when in the end, their fans just want some bloody content already. But I digress. These are just this simple Rhino suggestions on how to solve and avoid future content droughts. What about your suggestions, Legion? Got any other ideas that might do the trick? Or maybe you just have an awesome idea for an event or reward we'd love to see in game. Leave them all in a comment below and we'll do our best to get right back to you. As always, thank you for watching and catch you next time, Legion. Take care.